right. Thank you so much for the warm introduction. Thank you, Clemens. Thank you so much, Monica, for the invitation. Last year we had a great time online, and it's always much nicer, to have this live event again. So very happy to be here. Thanks everyone for joining. I'm gonna hydrate a lot during this talk because I have a sore throat, and I heard I'm not the only one. So it's just water. So indeed, thanks for asking. Who is leading? Who is lagging behind? I'm a bit sad to see, I turned my head and I looked around. Nobody answered Europe. Nobody answered Europe. Well, that was the only point I was trying to make in my talk, so thanks for joining. I'm out. No, fortunately, there are great things happening in AI in Europe. This event, of course, but not only this event. And to be honest, there is some truth in what you all acknowledge, that Europe is lagging behind. Yes, we're going to see that. But there are also amazing opportunities ahead. And I'm a bit tired. I spent like half of my life in the US, half of my life in Europe, and a bit in Asia, but that's like just a tiny bit. That's more than 100%, but that's the way we do today. We all work a bit too much. And I'm a bit tired to always hear the same thing about AI, that's the US and China. And then Europe is just completely, more than on the side, just does not exist on the map. And I want to correct that and actually come back at the end of the talk with some kind of an enthusiastic, positive message. So there is a world in 2030 where we can have the US, China, and Europe. There is a window of opportunity if we focus on the right part of AI and if we come together. If we keep having a siloed AI initiative, a French AI, an Australian AI, a German AI, a Spanish AI, we will be basically where the aerospace industry was in the 60s, where European countries were competing with each other and could not compete with the rising, Boeing in the US. We're pretty much at this moment. So it is a really, really, really important time, and I work a lot with Brussels and the European Commission to try to kind of bring together also different initiatives. These initiatives are important. The Austrian AI initiative is important. The French AI is important. The German AI is important. But what's more important is to come together, unite, and scale. And that's the only way we can have, by 2030, a different answer to what we had this morning. So let's get started. I'm not going to spend too much time on that because you know that already. Yes, today, especially if you look at the big tech giants, there are like 7 major companies in AI today, like the big tech companies. On the Chinese side, Alibaba, Baidu, Tencent. On the US side, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Facebook. Yes, we know that. You all, you didn't raise your hand for Europe, so you all know that. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. When it comes to funding that goes to AI startup, not too hard to guess which country is the country in green. This is the US. You see OpenAI there. You say Databricks, Anthropic. You know these companies. Behind OpenAI, we have Microsoft. Behind Anthropic, we have Google. We know all of that as well. A lot of the funding is going mainly to the US. That's green. Then China in blue. And then we have something a little bit more tiny here, which is EU27 in orange. It's quite tiny. Actually, this rectangle here is Paris. This is Germany here. And it's pretty small. Here we have London. So essentially, right now, today, yes, again, you're right, not much happening. But, and we'll see that in the last part of the talk, not much, but great source of growth and opportunity over there. Not a spoiler, but especially around open source Gen AI, which is really something fundamental. And we need to make sure we don't mess up the AI Act by over-regulating the open source part of AI. When it comes to patents, we have a slightly different picture than looking at startups. Here we have a more bipolar world, kind of equal between the US and China. Still, Europe not doing fantastic. Here it's like EU27 plus the EFTA countries and the UK. And we still have kind of a similar picture in the sense that it's the US, pretty much the US and China. Now, in terms of how it changed over time, and if we kind of look back, and by the way, AI, I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone here knows that, but AI is not a new field. You know, AI is 70 plus year old, so it's actually not such a new technology. It's just basically over the past 10 years that we had very wide implication that we actually see and that AI is being useful. So the first wave of AI was basically marked by recommender systems that we use essentially to filter a lot of information in the world, you know, for like search, recommendation of music, songs, you know, whatever you're reading, which by the way is completely non-trivial because you have a machine that filters what you see and what you don't see in the world. So it has major implication also. Who builds that? How? What are the heuristics? Right now the heuristic is to maximize scrolling time. So there are things to think about, of course. And then the second major AI revolution, which is what we see today, is basically generative AI. The ability to generate content that basically before was only in the realm of humans. And by the way, it's very interesting when you attend AI events, because the goalposts of what machines can do keep moving every year, right? I mean, what we talked about last year, you know, is already irrelevant. And what we're going to be talking about today, in 6 months will have changed. So if you look at the, you know, I've been interesting exercise watching AI conference over the past 10 years. And every year there is this question, what can machine do? What can human do? And that changed every year. Right? So it's always interesting to think about it in that sense as well. So if we think about AI over, you know, like kind of a long period of time, since 2004, more or less, in the whole world of AI, you had, it was not on par between the US and Europe, but somehow it was almost comparable, right? I mean, of course, much bigger in the US, but somehow Europe was there in the first wave, let's say, of AI, could have had a chance somehow. And then what you see is that, you know, Europe being like completely squeezed, this is just the amount of patents, but that's an interesting metrics that basically give a good picture of what's happening. And then, of course, China really, you know, rising and having a very positive slope. Japan kind of shrinking as well, and Japan had a bigger impact at the beginning. And essentially now we end up with the US, China world that you all describe, raising your hand. Now, we could talk for a long time about why, and I really believe that why is a big question. And I'm just going to give the usual suspect and some a bit less usual. So one of the usual suspects, actually when I talk with non-economists, people that don't know anything about AI, the first thing is like, oh, it's cultural. You know, Europeans don't like to take risk. You know, not entrepreneurial. Somehow it's true. You know, I teach in the US and in Europe. And in the US, it's very common that students try to convert their research project into basically starting a company. In Europe, much less, like, oh, we just do it for the academic grade and we move on, right? So there is a bit of truth, but I think this is a little bit too much. There are some structural things. We're talking about it with Monica yesterday. You know, basically what's happening is like R&D switched tremendously from being publicly funded to being private funded. Okay, so that's, you know, if you look at the Amazon Industrial Transition Fund, basically how to automate warehouse workers, and Amazon has 1.2 million employees, so that's immense, right? So it's an immense part of the workforce that could be automated. It's more than 1 billion a year, you know, they invest in that. And that's only one part of the AI budget. So yes, money comes from the private sector. We had a big shift that was in the US in the 90s. And where does the money come from behind the private sector? It's very much from VC. And where does it come from VC? Pension fund. And of course, it's much less in Europe than in the US. So we could talk for a very long time also about this, let's say, more financial aspect. And this is important. There are things to fix in that space. Now, something we forget, we tend to forget as well, is that the US was very much specialized on supporting technologies. So here in black, you have you don't see there are lines here that you don't see, but just imagine the lines between the dots. And essentially the size of the dot tells you how strong you are in a specific technology. And what you see here is like the US. Okay, this mic had enough of me. Oh, no, I'm back. And what you see is like before the AI revolution, the US was already very strongly specialized around control, computer technology, IT methods for management, and a lot of different technologies that were very, very strongly related to AI. You see this big mass, these big bubbles basically around AI, and Europe basically did not have this area of supporting specialization. So there were missing technologies already that were complementing AI that really made us in a really bad head start, right? So we had to overcome also some missing complementary technologies and skills, which now we might be a little bit closer. But basically we were kind of facing a headwind at the beginning. Now, of course, elephant in the room, Europe is a collection of digital markets, okay? And that's a big issue, and that's the first thing we have to really try to think about seriously, how to create this very unified digital market. So if you think about one of the first social network in the world, actually 2 years before Facebook, came from a place not too far from Vienna, came from Budapest, the international who is who, at some point had 4 million Hungarian on a social network, like the equivalent of Facebook, really, 2 years before. So Europe is not lagging in terms of coming up with new innovation, new technology. The problem is like network effect. What happened once Facebook entered the market? Well, you're not limited to only befriend other Hungarians. You can now befriend with someone else, in the US, in France. So what you do, you switch to a technology that, it's like network effects that we all know in economics. But the problem is that network effects in the field of AI, in the field of internet data, are just completely magnified. Meaning you can have a superior technology, but who cares if you don't have enough users? And of course, the same happened in e-commerce platform. We have different e-commerce platform in Europe. So we came up with these technologies as well, but we could never scale them because we have fragmented digital markets. So that's one big issue. Fragmented digital market and fragmented user data. Yet, the big issue was that it was open to competition. Okay? So one of the issues that China took a policy decision, and it's very hard to know if it was an industrial policy decision or something about culture, but early 2000, China decided basically to put a fence around its internet data. And at the time, basically it prevented a lot of very strong US technology to enter the market, and then they could grow their own champions, while the industry was maturing. Whether it was the smartest industrial policy move ever, or chance to prevent, like different culture coming to the country, it's still a big question, but in fact, it appeared that it allowed for the growth of local champions. And everything I'm saying now actually has implication also on what we could do in Europe, to basically fix some of this issue. Now, one of the questions now I want to answer is like, who cares? Who cares? Is that a problem? The fact that we have the US and China dominating the AI world. And I prepared a few minutes, to discuss about that. Why? Because I think it's crazy not to care. But very often, I am with decision makers that ask me this question. They say, yeah, but, we have a good life in Europe. Like, who cares? And is AI really leading to a lot of job creation? At the end of the day, and a lot of our politicians, what they care about is jobs. It's like, who cares? Is it really like leading to a lot of jobs? Like, who cares? And I had to prepare an answer to that question. Just raise your hand if you think it's not that much of a big deal if the AI that will come in the next decade will come either from the US and China. Just raise your hand if you think it's not a big deal. Okay, you all think it's a big deal. So at least you hear from me that this is very common, and also in economics. I won't cite any name. I was in Boston last week discussing with really top economists that you all know, and someone was sitting like this in his office and be like, but really, who cares? Who cares? Do we really need Europe to, okay. Yes, we should care, but I'm gonna say that in 30 seconds instead of 5 because you all already agree. Well, the slide before actually was about, if you care, if you think there is a link between development of AI and safe AI, I mean, you should be in the driving seat. You should not just be like, okay guys, throw your models and then we'll regulate. No, you should also come up with an alternative that integrates whatever. So you should also be leading in terms of foundation model and products, okay? And you see that in the AI Safety Summit, looks like people care about AI safety. It looks also that just government, just care about that. If you look at the amount of bills, the executive orders in the US, like the past in October, like exactly 1 month ago, the AI Act underway already since 2017, the next generation AI plan in China, the French AI strategy, and basically the AI strategy of virtually every country in the world. It looks like governments care as well. I also believe that technology equals growth in the long run, and it's really hard to imagine that you will only benefit from AI from a productivity standpoint by adopting. So one of the big questions in the Commission is always, again, who cares if we don't develop these models? What matters is the uptake, is that our company use AI. And I'm always like, no, like, the lion's share goes to who produce these AI models, not only the productivity gain that you will use because you use a better tool. That is important, absolutely, but that's not where most of your growth and your gains will come in the long run. So again, and I'm just throwing that a little bit at you, just kind of to check the argument. We can discuss the mechanisms behind, and also if you disagree. But essentially, there is a clear relationship between being at the frontier, being the producer of the technology, and growing in the long run. Application of AI. I mean, I do workshop on this thing. We go through hundreds of use cases in AI. We could spend, if I have 2 hours, I'll spend a bit more time on this slide. It's everywhere. Like literally, I still have a hard time figuring it out one sector, one industry where AI does not have a completely transformative impact. Okay? It's still hard. If you have one, please raise your hand and tell me like, oh, on this, I really don't see how an artificial intelligence could bring productivity gain or transform the business model. I mean, I just don't see it. I just don't see it. In some sectors, it's more a matter of time. It will take longer, but essentially, it's pretty much everywhere. Which also means it's not just developing the foundation model, it's also developing the industry of the future. So having a head start in the production of AI will also be connected to the transformation of this sector. Just think about banking. I cannot say the name of the banks, but like 2 large banks, again last week, and they have 300,000 employees. And then probably we'll talk about later with Fabian. 300,000 employees. And then they were telling me like, basically, how do we compete with Apple Pay? Most of our services now, we are an industry that was built for like face-to-face interaction. We needed to have offices. Our job and our comparative advantage was to deploy sites where you could have interaction with customer. Now everything is done literally from a mobile phone. How do I justify 300,000 employees, this payroll? How justify office space? Very expensive and all of that. And I mean, obviously, this is going to lead to transformation of industry. Now the problem is, once you develop and you transform this industry, then you can scale also your products across countries. So the competition is global. Which also means when we think about AI and having a head start in AI, it's also having a head start in basically, transforming almost every industry. Well, that's not enough to convince people that are not convinced. I don't know what to say. And that to me is also another element which is connected to economic geography. It's like, historically, we used to have what we call a local moat. Meaning, if my business is to be a restaurant, to be a hairdresser, I'm only competing with other local businesses. And what we see is, with the digitalization and globalization, that you have very strong concentration of production capabilities, but consumption is global. Meaning, I mean, we all use ChatGPT. I don't think any one of us hasn't used ChatGPT. If not, then you're in trouble. But all of us use this technology that was produced by very few people, on the other part of the world. meaning we're going into a winner-takes-all world where a few people, a few companies can deploy products that's going to be adopted by everyone. So again, no local moat, much less of a local moat. So a much more global competition is happening, and that's going to be true for all the industry we're talking about. It's going to be true also for education, right? There is a very interesting quote, if you're interested, again by Elon Musk. You were citing Elon Musk before, and he was talking about teachers. And it was, in his analogy, it's like, think about the best movie you ever seen. Okay, I think he used Batman, whatever. Okay, his favorite movie. The best movie you ever seen. And it's like, the way education is structured is that every local university is trying to replay this movie with local production capabilities. Okay, which means it's like, it's not very professional, not very good. And the future of education will be giant super production, Netflix style, masterclasses, plus AI tutoring that will basically scale at a global level, right? And this is already happening. So universities also will have to reinvent their business model. Now, I'm not going to go too much into that because that's going to be, of course, Fabian is going to be doing a much better job than me. The only point I'm going to say here is that if you look at the composition of countries in terms of jobs and occupation, and the ones that are the most at risk of automation, they're actually the rich countries. They're actually the countries where you see a lot of this job. Junior programmers are in for a very rough time. You can already see that in the data. Soft dev, advertising, paralegal, legal assistant. Anybody that is doing like an assistant kind of job is in trouble. And that's going to be a huge issue, but again, I'm not going to focus on that. But the question is like, where do we find these jobs? Well, these jobs, they tend to be found in the rich countries. Hong Kong, Israel, Sweden, the UK, US, Singapore, the Eurozone. So actually was kind of maybe not something that people were expecting a couple of years ago, but the countries and the regions and the cities the most exposed to automation, they might be actually the one that already have a very high income. Not going to focus on that, sorry. Now, another reason why we should care, and maybe something that it tends to be overlooked, is that, and there's a great paper called Which Humans, published like 2 weeks ago or so, which basically shows that large language models like ChatGPT, Llama 2, Mistral, they tend to be biased toward what they call the weird countries. And the weird countries are Western, educated, industrials, rich, and democratic. So when you talk to ChatGPT, ChatGPT has a way to see the world, like values, that are embedded by reinforcement learning from human feedbacks. What it means is that you have an army of people, an army of humans, that basically tell the model how to behave. Like you will tell to a child, don't do this, don't call this person, a fat person. Don't say that. This is not a proper thing to say. And the internet, which is the source of data, for like large language models, is full of hateful comments and terrible things. So you need to have an army of humans that basically tell the model how to behave. Don't say that. Don't say that. That's not a good thing to say. Now, how do you embed these rules? Which values of the world is it reflecting? And what you see, I don't know if I have a pointer here. I don't think I have one. So try to find it. But somehow in the top between the Netherlands and the US is ChatGPT. How similar is ChatGPT conversation to the conversation you find in other countries? So ChatGPT is super closely related to the Netherlands, the US, basically, again, weird countries, but very, very far from Pakistan, Ethiopia, Myanmar, Indonesia. So, but think about it. If this education model, if we have a world of Netflix-style masterclass, where you pay $30 a month to have lectures from Elon Musk, from Paul Krugman, Monica, like the star economists, right, in the world, or the star of AI. And you have this super production masterclass, where the marginal cost of another student is basically zero. And that diffuses very much. Plus AI tutoring that basically interact with you to make sure you understand what's going on. Imagine this at scale. Again, what are the messages and how are the messages being pushed really matters. So we need alternatives. We cannot have a world where you're going to have one just for the US, one for China. So a lot of reason basically why to care, why we should care. And that's the big data, feedback loop. That's why network effects, just put a square term, all the network effects that in like, telecom and stuff like that, just put a square term and you got the impact on AI. Why? Because if you have some kind of luck, better marketing, better product, doesn't matter, whatever kind of head start, you get to more customers, users, more data, better algorithm, and just iterate this loop long enough, and you get to a space dominated by a winner takes all. And again, it's so easy to churn from ChatGPT to Llama 2 to something else. It's just price and performance that matter, even probably not price that much, like really performance. So once you have a model that does better than anything else, and then you have this kind of feedback loop that gets activated, why would you go for something inferior, right? So we get the same, in the search engine space, 80% of the search are on Google in the Western world. So we have the same kind of effect. Well, what does that mean? Don't start too long, before investing and making sure you have also, okay. Now the good news, because so far you'd be like, okay, so I was right. Europe is behind. Now you tell me it's important to be ahead. What do we do? Well, I have a great news. I'm not going to sing. That's the first great news. The second one is Europe has an immense amount of time. There is something. There is a base. All hope is not lost. But we have to act, and the window of opportunity is closing. So we have a chance. First of all, these are some of the people that are the most influential in the development of AI today. I think all of them, maybe Johan, better than me. Clément Delangue, the French crowd, I tend to know a bit better. There is one I didn't put a name because everybody knows him. It's Yann LeCun. Now, there is a little problem with this. Do you know what's the problem? We have great Europeans developing AI. None of them are working in Europe, right? Meta, San Francisco, Raquel is in Toronto. Jürgen Schmidbucher is still working in Germany. But that's kind of one of the issues. But we have top talent, top European talent. And then that's the good news. I mean, this is really hard to create talent, right? So we have amazing talent. Actually, if you look at the NeurIPS conference, which is known to be top conference in deep learning and essentially AI, and you look at where people graduated. So the ability of a place to produce, this is the top 20% researcher in developing deep learning. Where did they graduate? Okay, undergrad. Okay, where was the undergrad? So the ability to produce skills that matter in AI. Well, this is a very different picture from the first one we looked at, no? The first one, basically, there were no orange in terms of production of technology. Here, it's actually above the US. Okay? And we always say, okay, top institution in the US, and yes, we do have top institution in the US, completely true. But actually, we're not behind, we're actually a little bit ahead, and China is ahead. It's also a matter of size, but to be honest, this is a picture that, I like this picture, and if we can match that in terms of development of LLMs, in terms of patents, in terms of technology, in terms of products, I'll be happy. But that means we do have the undergrad talent. This is a really important message to push. We do have the undergrad talent. We just need to make sure it stays in Europe. But we have a base. We have something to work on. India also, India actually, if you look at the brain drain, is insane. India does not appear almost on any picture in terms of production, but the top Indian engineers in ML, they basically go to the US. And if you look at who leads, Silicon Valley companies, you'll see a lot of people that were trained in India, also Iran, quite substantially. Oops, sorry. Now, something important when we talk about AI or any complex technologies, they're not developed in a vacuum. The geography of this technology matters, and they tend to be super concentrated in space. So we should actually not compare countries, European countries, with the US, but the cities. And then the picture also look a bit different when we look at the cities. So this is the same picture as before in terms of the startups. Now, this is, sorry, I don't have the pointer, but you see what I'm trying to show. This is Boston. This is Paris, and this is Shenzhen. And anybody that's been to China knows how much Shenzhen is leading. And actually, in China, it's not like almost everything else is Silicon Valley in the US. So it's very concentrated in the US. In China, it tends to be Beijing, Hangzhou, and Shenzhen. But essentially, if you look at the city level, it's not that bad. We're not doing that bad. And some of the European cities are not doing that bad. And that's where our bets should start. We should start betting on the ecosystem that are already having critical mass. They do have critical mass already. So if you look actually at these places, we have Ile-de-France, which is Paris, the Munich area, London area, Eindhoven area, in terms of like really critical mass at the global scale. And we have 4 places also doing pretty well that punch above their weight, meaning in relative terms, they tend to be over-specialized in AI. So we have something to start from in terms of, we have like some ecosystem that do have capabilities also to be world-class level and clusters. Now, if we look at Vienna, for instance, and this is a graph that we use quite a lot, and actually that's part of the work with Julia here, who is in the audience. And here, what we look at is also in which technologies regions and cities should invest. And prioritization, making priorities is super important when you invest. And we talked about it yesterday night as well. It's all about making priorities. You cannot invest in any technology. So if you look at the green transition technologies in green and the digital transition technologies in blue, there are already like a lot of technologies that you could decide to invest on. You could decide to put more money in robotics or in electrical vehicles, 5G, IoT, big data. And we need a framework to make this investment decision to basically make an impact and make sure we can develop the lead in a specific technology. So in the case of Vienna, for instance, Vienna is doing pretty well, has pretty good chance to develop some nice AI technologies, mainly come from the large companies located here, not too much the startup ecosystem, but still there are some capabilities. What this axis is telling you is how much supporting technologies and related technologies you have in Vienna. So basically, how likely you are also in the future to lead in this technology. So it is a good news, okay? It is a good news. There are some good things. And the other axis is complexity, and complexity is a driver of growth in the long run, meaning it's a technologies in which you're going to have low competition. It's like building airplanes. So these technologies there are top, but then you have technologies where actually related industries are very, very absent. 5G, for instance. So I'm not an expert on the Vienna ecosystem, but hopefully it makes sense if you know the Vienna ecosystem. The Ile-de-France region will look completely different. The Brittany region will look completely different. Here's more like a good news from the local market of Vienna. Vienna has some potential, apparently, around AI. Now, a bad news, good news, bad news. The European AI ecosystem is not integrated at all. If we look at collaboration between regions in Europe, in blue, these are collaboration between 2 regions within the same country. In green, between 2 regions cross-country. Now, this is not pretty at all. There's way too much blue. My high-level conclusion, too much blue. If you think about it, it is completely insane, nonsense, impossible to predict economically why you have Ile-de-France and Rhône-Alpes. They basically have 1% of the European collaboration. The 2 biggest clusters of AI in Europe, London and Paris. Sorry, so Ile-de-France, when I say Ile-de-France, is Paris. The 1.01% here. We're going to have to find here the Ile-de-France, London, 0.5% here. So the 2 largest, by far, clusters of AI in Europe, and we're talking really big numbers, you will expect them to collaborate a lot. You will expect like an immense bridge between them, which is something that you see in the US. You do have this immense bridge between San Francisco and New York and Boston and Austin. You see these immense bridges, this big cluster. They connect, they collaborate massively. What we see in Europe is very different. So I'm not sure we can see too much Austria here. Maybe you already have. Basically, this you know, it's organized, it's hierarchical. This is the UK, for instance, okay? This is the UK. This is Germany. Like the big square here is Germany. I'm not sure if we can see Austria. Here? No. Here. Up here. Yeah, here. Okay. And I have no idea what is Lower Austria. So Lower Austria, the collaboration between Lower Austria and Vienna, there are more collaboration between Lower Austria and Vienna than between Paris and London in AI. Okay. Oh, it's still Vienna. You mean it's, is it like the same labor market, you would say?
A lot of influx comes from Vienna. A lot of people come to Vienna.
But somehow, okay, so it could be the same labor market. Could be part of it could be same labor market. It's using NUTS 2 classification, so it should not, but maybe it's actually in practice the same labor market. Could be. In some cases, for instance, the Stockholm area, pretty much the labor market. I can tell you for sure, Île-de-France, Rhône-Alpes, not the same labor market. And most of them, they're really surprising. And the big issue is this, okay? It's a big issue. So we cannot, the point of the story here is like, we're really in the 60s before having this Airbus moment. This is where we are in AI. It's completely fragmented digital space. It's a fragmented research and innovation space. And there is no way that we're going to have an EU leading AI world if we don't fix that. So a couple of things so you see some positive things, but things to fix as well. Now there is something we're good at in Europe, and that's regulating. Now this is a space of regulation. We collected all AI bills and regulation across the world and put them together. I think there are like 1,000 of them. Well, now you see a lot of orange. So in terms of regulation, we're actually leading the way, which is not, you know, it's not that much of a bad thing. There is a bad joke in the US running in the software world. It's like you have a European, a Chinese, and an American that walk in the bar. The American's like, oh, I'll bring the software. Chinese is like, I'll bring the hardware. And the European is like, I'll bring the regulation. So there is this running joke, which is not true in many levels because China now is bringing both. But there is a little bit of this in the back of the mind of people, and that can be a bad thing. Yes, it can be a bad thing. There are some part of GDPR that hurt startups. Why? Because it creates a barrier of entry. I mean, same old stories of like incumbents trying to over-regulate to prevent entry, you know, I mean, same old story. So regulation can be a strength because people need safe AI, okay, across the world. So people love our, you know, European regulation when it comes to food, when it comes to toys. This regulation is important, can be a source of comparative advantage, or could really push us down to the ground if we do like with GDPR, which, you know, basically we put compliance at a level that only the big techs can survive, and if you're a small company. So we have to take that into account, which, by the way, in a quirky way, the AI executive order of October 23 in the US did by putting some kind of weight. They're trying to do like a sandbox kind of regulation, which has good intention. So we need to make sure we do that as well. And this is our source of comparative advantage. This is our window of opportunity. I've never seen such enthusiasm. Like I see now on Twitter, people like, what's going on with, especially with French AI and Paris, what's going on in Paris? Massive round of investment, great AI tech coming around, Meta moving a lot of research over there, Hugging Face, super French developed, having a lot of collaboration also with Station F, one of the largest AI incubator in the world in Paris, Xavier Niel from Free, which is telecom, also investing massively, millions in AI. And essentially what you see is a lot of great work, for instance, Mistral 7B, coming actually from Europe when it comes to open source Gen AI. So again, you can have completely private Gen AI or you can have open source Gen AI. And it looks like we really have a comparative advantage. We have some really superior strengths in Europe when it comes to open source Gen AI. And so basically what we have to do two things. We have to nurture that invest, push money, go with the momentum, blow behind, and we need to make sure we don't destroy that with regulation. And now we have the AI Act, and we really have to make sure that we regulate with the AI Act products, application, not the research and the foundation models. This is an opportunity to foster open source AI development and increase competition and decentralization. Let's not over-regulate the open source part of Gen AI. It's like trying to regulate a math theorem. Like, let's not do that. Let's nurture it. So invest and don't regulate this part. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your talk. I would like to, if there are, to take 2 questions right now. I mean, we will have the opportunity later on to discuss some of the aspects a little bit further later on in the panel. But are there immediate questions right now to Professor Balland? Yeah.
You were mentioning that you do not have a moat anymore, but I think when you look to Tesla, the data they own is a big advantage. So you were showing us we do not have this moat anymore.
Actually, we agree with what you just said. We don't have a local moat. A local moat means if I'm a hairdresser here in Vienna, I am not competing with a hairdresser in California. So I have a local moat, even though I might be more expensive and a worse hairdresser. Your example is actually to this point. Tesla, you're going into the wheel of comparative advantage, has millions of vehicles. Like this fleet is just sniffing around, collecting data with sensor and everything. And actually integrating large language model with Grok. Now you're going to have Grok, which is trained on Twitter, together in your Tesla. So you integrate physical and cognitive AI in a crazy way. And the problem is, like, once you have this developed, you don't have a local moat anymore. Because if a local moat somehow in the auto industry could be like shipping cars, which is not, because the costs of shipping are very small, think about the comparative advantage of Tesla. Tesla is not a car company. Tesla has nothing to do with the green transition. Tesla is an AI company. And then Tesla going to update, with a push of a button, the entire worldwide fleet, which means, again, no local moat. So that actually we agree on that.
I thought the company has a huge moat.
It creates an immense moat for the company, which is the feedback loop part, but not a local moat. But meaning the global competition is it's almost pure and perfect in that space.
And there's one more question from our streamers, from Mario. From a government viewpoint, considering the disruptive nature of AI on the employment market, do we need a machine or AI tax to make up for the loss of human capital?
Repeat.
If we need, it goes a little bit into the next talk. Actually, also it's about an AI tax to make up for the human capital loss. Yeah.
I'm going to answer really shortly because we're running out of time. I'm going to say yes. We have to think about a redistributive system, 100%. And I'm sure we're going to have more opportunities to talk about it. But that really comes closer, I think, to Fabien's talk. But this AI world will create a lot of winners. And a lot of our kids, I think, will be part of this winning generation. But it will also create people that might not gain immediately from this world and clearly will be replaced from a work standpoint. I mean, I have no doubt about that. So you're going to have a massive concentration of gain in the hands of some people, companies, cities. And that's just not fair. So we're going to have to redistribute wealth somehow. Through tax systems, through UBI, we have to think about it. But if we don't do that, we're going to have massive, massive social issues. And happy to develop more in the panel.
Thank you so much for your talk and your input, and I'm happy to prolong that discussion later on. But as you see, one of the first questions revolves around jobs and around human capital. And this is one of the classic prejudices that come to mind when we talk about AI.